I set out to experiment with hinges, rotational motion on a single axis, but I learned a lot more about nothing to do with hinges whatsoever. Let's get into it. Okay, so generally, whenever I'm building anything that needs to take some sort of shape and there's sort of sculpture involved, I definitely like to start with a sketch because that helps solidify the form in my mind. It gives me a sense of proportion, gives me a sense of the 3D space that it'll occupy, all the components relative to each other, right? So that's why I always like to start with a sketch. It's different if it were something electronic, then that wouldn't be necessary, right? So this digit, and this digit need to be 180 degrees flexible. But I think I can pull it off by making the last joints rigid, but putting 90-degree flexibility here and 90-degree flexibility here. That way, when you tilt the hand up, you have the option of bringing down these 3 digits. Whereas, in order to get the effect we want, I can get away with keeping this one rigid, which simplifies it. And then there's no reason for this one. In fact, we want this one to be as rigid as possible. So that's what we're going for. Okay, so I decided to use the carpal bones as the anchor point to which everything will be, will be the foundation point for the fingers. So I lofted some parts into existence here. So basically what you do is you create these sketches and then you offset them from each other on a plane, and those become cross-sectional sort of boundaries, right? And you loft from one to the next, create these solids in 3D space. So see, you'll move this back, and then those become boundaries or perimeter boundaries at different cross-section points, and then when you loft across them, then you create a 3D solid. And then, of course, these don't really look like carpal bones, I know that, but they just sort of formulate a basic foundation which I can then later build. So then I got those on the printer, Spectrum wood PLA. I don't necessarily, there are cheaper brands than Spectrum. This just happens to be the one that I had available at the time. And then on to modeling the joints. Now the joints are a 2-part component. The concept is obviously nothing new. This is sort of the receptive part of the joint. It's just a socket with 2 holes to allow a pin through, and then this is the insertion portion. And again, that's just gonna receive the shaft, so it'll become the finger phalanges, and then it has a portion with a hole through it for a pin as well. Create a pivot point between the 2 parts. Getting the supports off of these tiny little pieces was not easy because they're very fragile, and so I had to be very careful, and I did in fact break some trying to get the supports off. I had made a few extra anticipating that problem. I wasn't very careful about the hole size where these dowels will be inserted, so I had to carve off a little bit to make them fit. And then here I'm just using some very thin, some extremely thin CA glue to anchor them down. And one on the other side, of course. Now, there are a couple of reasons. I could have used thicker gel type CA glue, but what I want is for the CA glue to run down and get in between the layer lines and act as a consolidator. Sort of like when you restore an old beam, and if you can sort of cut away the rot and then infuse it with a consolidating product to make it sturdy again. That's the idea I had with this thin CA glue. And then now inserting a pin that's just a 1/8 dowel. I cut a chisel end on it so that it would hopefully guide itself through. It didn't fit perfectly, but I deliberately I didn't want to give too much play in those holes because I wanted to make sure the pins would stay in place, so that when I glue them, it would be not as difficult than if they were wiggling around. So, proof of concept. Now, they are, as I anticipated, this is very fragile. I could snap this very easily right now. So, that's where the CA glue comes back in. So here now, I'm going to use CA glue. I'm just going to put a small amount at either end of the pin, that pivot pin, to lock it in place, and then continue to keep moving the joint because I don't want any of that CA glue to seep down and then seize the joint, right? And then carry on the same process because each digit requires 2 joints. So just repeating the same process again for a second joint to assemble the phalanges, as they're called. So again, just the same thing, inserting the pin, trimming off the excess, gluing, just the exact same thing several more times. And there we have a proof of concept. Now comes the sculpting portion. So this is just a OD brand Fix-It stick. It's just a 2-part putty epoxy. People in the hobby world will use Milliput. I've never looked at the MSDS sheets, but I'm pretty sure they're just literally the same stuff. If they're not literally the same, they're very, very close. Just the OD you can buy at any old hardware store, and it's cheaper than Milliput, which you would have to source from either a hobby store or online. So here I'm just wrapping some around to start creating the shape of a joint. It didn't stick very well at all to the wood or to the PLA. It stuck a lot better to the gloves I was wearing, so that was a bit of a pain. And then on to the automotive polyester filler, which most people just call Bondo, but there are different brands, and some would argue there are better brands. But Bondo is certainly the most widely known. And this stuff, of course, is quite thin, so you have to be a little bit sloppy. Unfortunately, you can't shape it initially. You just have to do your best and then let it start to harden up. Again, bending the joint to make sure it's not seizing up. Now, before it's fully cured, once it's started to harden, it's very nice for carving. You don't even need a sharp object, just this little flat knife here. And you can take away a lot of the excess. Whenever you can cut away something that you would otherwise later have to grind, cut it. You can cut away large portions very easily. Grinding it or sanding it, using abrasion of any sort, is going to be way slower and more tedious, and you're not going to like it. There are the carpal bones off the printer, and inserting one of the fingers with only one joint at this point as a test. So now I'm just going to skip ahead because the next step to creating form is, well, what I chose here is to use Radtech what do you call it, resin, UV curing resin. Make sure you're wearing your goggles, of course, when you're curing it. But what I do is I mix in a little bit of baby powder, and not too much though, because if you do, then it won't cure. Because when you direct the UV light at it, the baby powder, if there's too much of it in the mix, it'll just block the UV light from penetrating, and then the resin won't cure. So I've mentioned this before. When I prime, I generally prime prematurely. When I know there's still some sanding to do, but priming accentuates any surface blemishes, any tool marks that I'm going to need to get rid of that I maybe can't see very well. Only I made a big mistake in this case. I used black primer. Now, I used a fantastic black primer. That was Createx Sealer. Pretty sure it's polyurethane based. It is an excellent primer. Did you notice the pigment load? Just how darn black that was when I was applying it? You couldn't see through it, right? No streaks at all. So here I've done this thing where I use primer to accentuate the problem areas, sand the problem areas, and then go back and prime again. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was I learned that the black primer, even though this is a fantastic primer, it doesn't do what I intend to make happen in that premature priming, which is accentuate things that I need to sand out. That didn't happen with the black, which was unfortunate, because what ended up happening, as you'll see later, is that when I paint it using lighter colors, then a whole bunch of surface problems that I didn't think were an issue, in fact were. So onto the painting, using, I think this was Createx, yeah it was Createx Pearl. And you see it's going on very nicely. Prior to what you're seeing here, I used a bunch of Army Painter brand paints, which are hobby grade. They're for people that paint minis. I used them because I have them. I have all kinds of colors in them. Let's just say that I decided to try, I was getting frustrated, and I decided to try a better paint to see if that would help. And wow, switching to the Createx Wicked Color to Wicked Color Pearl, man, what a difference. Like, night and day. As you can see here, I'm spraying for long periods without having to stop and wipe the needle. As you can also see that just down by the base of the thumb, see that clump there? Now, I'm not saying that the black primer, that didn't show when it was only black primer, but that's an example you can see on camera. If you had this in your hand and you were able to look at it closely, you'd see what I saw, which is all kinds of little surface imperfections that I just didn't realize were going to show, because with the black primer only, they didn't show. But now that I was applying this lighter color, yeah, I found that I didn't have the surface quality I wanted, and surface quality wasn't my goal here. My goal was to experiment with 3D printed hinges, and to make a prank prop. Like, see where the knuckles come together, all those little imperfections. Obviously, I could have fixed those. I just didn't realize they were necessary. I was tricked into thinking they weren't by the black primer. So I'm going to have to get that. But mind you, that's the first time I've used the Createx Sealer primer, and it was fantastic stuff. So I'm going to have to see if they have a white or a gray, and if they do, then I'll be buying some. One of the reasons I love being a maker, and there are many, I can't help but be creative. It's just sort of wired into the way that I am. And I think we all have it to some degree, but some people more than others. But one of the things about it that's really I just love it, is that when you take on a task, there's this sort of unknown ahead of you of I mean, I don't mean to sound cheesy or cliche, but it's sort of like a journey where you don't quite know what's along the way because you're forced to tackle and solve obstacles along the way that you didn't anticipate. And in so doing, there's this exciting, unknown possibility of learning new things you didn't even realize you were going to learn, things maybe you didn't even think of in advance at all. You know, I set out to make a prop, a gag Halloween prop, and I succeeded with these articulating radial hinged fingers where I was able to create rotation but restricted it to one axis. You know, but that turned out to be, you know, not so exciting. I thought it was going to be a really fun process, and I didn't know if it was going to work. And I did learn. I learned that my idea worked, and that, you know, 3D printing is not the best medium for it, although I think I knew that in advance. But aside from learning that, the process of painting this, which was just an afterthought, ended up being the most significant learning portion of the exercise. You know, oops, pardon me. You know, the take that over again. You know, the painting process, which was just an afterthought, ended up turning out to be it's where I learned a lesson or two, at least one for sure, that I just won't forget again. And it's, you know, it's stuff that I really should have known. It's stuff that I did know, but I guess it just wasn't seared into my brain enough to avoid the potential mistake. But it is now, right? Because everyone, I'm sure you can relate to this. It's when you make a mistake and you're forced to bear the consequences of it. You know, I'll never make that mistake again, right? That's exactly what happened with me with a dark colored primer, right? When I prime, I often prime prematurely when I know that there's probably still sanding to do, but it gives me a sense of, it makes it easy to see where I need to focus my sanding. Where does it need more? But when you do it with a dark color, even though it's got some sheen, it doesn't really work. Because if you're going to paint with light color on top of that, suddenly all the little scratch marks, sanding marks, whatever, tool marks, they're all going to show. They don't show with the black primer, but they will with the light colored paint. The other thing was, I was reminded, and this, I definitely knew this, but I was reminded, you know, the value of high quality paint, you know, artist grade paint that's made specifically for high flow formulations that are made for airbrushing are so important, so important. You know, and it's specifically high flow designed to be used in an airbrush paint that made the difference in this case, right? Because it's not necessarily artist grade, right? Because if you can have very high grade paints where the binder is high quality, the vessel is high quality, but the pigments, not that they're not high quality, but they're not ground, you know, to 5 micron or you know, something like that. They're maybe only ground to 20 or something because they're designed for a brush or for, you know, scraping across a palette. The difference between the hobby grade paint and the artist grade paint, you know, the price difference is significant, but wow, so is the quality. You know, the ease of use, the reliability, the experience overall. Using the hobby grade paint, I won't be putting it in my airbrushes anymore. I just won't. You know, I've been keeping it around because it's handy, because I have so many colors. And I mean, especially with this thing, you know, it's a Halloween prop. You know, because the hobby paint that I had is designed specifically for people who paint miniatures, you know, it had several colors with the word bone in the name. So it just seemed to make sense. But it was an awful experience. It was literally unacceptable. It was terrible. My brush was clogging constantly. When I threw the golden brand in, and when I put in the Createx Wicked colors, you know, Bob's your uncle, no problem, all day long. Tip dry, virtually a non-issue. Well, it was a non-issue. I had to obviously wipe the tip periodically, every minute or so, every 2 minutes. But I mean, that's just part of airbrushing. And if I can wipe the tip every 2 minutes and not have to deal with tip dry, that's friggin' awesome. It's just, the experience is night and day. Anyway, I learned something. I hope you did too. Catch you on the next one.